name is Janet Roche, and I have a background in social work, and also I went back to school later in life to get my master's in design studies, and I found the program at the Boston Architectural College for designing for human health. I was the first cohort to go through that particular program, and now I have my own design company, Janet Roche Designs, as well as I run a podcast called Inclusive Designers, and of course, Trauma Informed Design, which I started with Dr. Hart.
Thanks, Janet.
I'm here in lovely Vermont today, so Vermont, United States. So
excellent. It is morning for me. I'm in Corvallis, Oregon, and I have a background as an early childhood educator. That was my original passion, was to teach in classrooms, working with young kids. I was very fortunate that the university I went to for undergraduate said, it's best if you have a double major in order to become a certified teacher when you graduate. And they packaged together this bundle of courses for us. And I chose this particular one called Child and Society. So this is something that I didn't know at the time would connect to my work many decades later, but this connection of sociology, psychology, and anthropological type of thinking has helped shape my career. After about 10 years of teaching classrooms, I could not shake the feeling of I needed to do something more with my cognitive powers and helping the children on a greater level than these 10 or 12 or 15 kids. Something about the space. What could I do about this space? So I also went back to school a little bit later in life and got a master's degree in design and human environments, focusing on interiors. I studied preschool children's behavior using video ethnography. And at that point, I thought, this is great. I've studied interior design. I can go be a designer now. And I like thinking about evidence and research, and this is very interesting to me. And then my life unfolded in a fortuitous way that I was able to get a PhD, which was no small feat. It was something that I did overseas in Sydney, Australia, where I was so fortunate to be invited to work on a team with midwives on a project called the Birth Unit Design Project. These midwives had looked at all the variables they could think of to improve birth outcomes for women and their families and their babies. But they realized nobody had really taken the time to look at the built environment of the spaces that birth was occurring in. So I came on board and I was able to help manage their project. And in conjunction to managing the project, I also wrote a dissertation and successfully a stamp of approval. So I'm now Dr. Hart. And I have the great privilege of being the director of the Design for Human Health program, where I met Janet almost 6 years ago now. I fly to Boston and I work from Zoom previous to the pandemic. So this is something that is a growing program. People come in with all different kinds of backgrounds. And I'm so excited today to talk with you, Dima, about some of the work that we do.
It's a pleasure to meet both of you, and your background is super impressive. Let's dive into, how did you guys come up with trauma-informed design?
Well, it was already a concept, right? So it was already a concept that was growing, and Davis and I really recognized how important it was, and it was important anyways. And then here came the pandemic, and we were just like, there's just no way that we can't ignore this particular part of design and really try to make something of it and share that information and share that knowledge. So at some point, Davis and I said, well, let's make some sort of society. Let's start gathering individuals. Let's gather people together, and let's start coming up with some sort of warehouse of information that people can access and learn more, not only about the concepts, but also learn how to implement them as well. So that was sort of the impetus of getting started. And I said, Davis, I'm like, let's go do this. Let's go make something and make something that might be really quite impactful. So here we are.
Yeah, I think for me, I watched the unfolding of evidence-based medicine turn into something that is now called evidence-based design. It's a different version of the same idea of let's use proper scientific research to better people's experiences with medicine. Now we're doing this with design. Similar, I think, with trauma-informed design, because the words trauma-informed, also sometimes folks refer to it as trauma sensitive. It means that you, as the applied practitioner, have an understanding of trauma and what it does to a human biology and the mental, the nervous system, what happens to a person. We're all biologically linked, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. This is the truth. And so when we look at, there's trauma-informed teaching and trauma-informed yoga, trauma-informed practices, we thought, well, obviously the work we're doing, there's lots of different terms to make design that works, but we really are, I think we're feeling very kind of honored to be able to shepherd this concept of trauma-informed design to a larger audience and create a way of knowing that this is knowledge that people can access and they can learn and they can apply it no matter what educational background is, or no matter what sort of culture they have at their firm or their place of practice and so forth. It's a doable process.
All right, so for those who don't know, let's say design students or up and coming architects, what are the principles of designing in a trauma-informed approach?
Well, there's not, again, it's an emerging field, right? A lot of set of principles per se, but there's a lot of ways to look at trauma. And when we go into trauma, we go into something called, we look at ACEs, for example. So ACEs is childhood, adverse childhood experiences. I was getting there. And there's sort of like a list of different types of traumas that can occur in one's childhood. And then that kind of lasts through people's lives. I think it's important to say that with trauma-informed design, the principles, I think, are, again, it's such an emerging field. And so maybe Davis and I have to kind of start really working on that a little bit more. But trauma is so nuanced and so layered. It's a little hard to sort of put things into some sort of like defined box. Your experiences are not the same as mine. And even if we went through the same type of maybe trauma, whatever that is, for you, you'll be like, I don't see what the big deal was. And for me, I would sit there and say, oh my God, that was the worst thing ever that's ever happened to me. And you can have the exact same experience. So it's a little nuanced, but we're working on that, and we're trying to really kind of hone in a little bit better to kind of really what might be, to your point, a set of principles. But that's sort of the background. Looking at these adverse experiences, again, even whether it's childhood or adult or what have you, but it's just multi-layered as well. So it's a little hard to kind of maybe wrap in a package.
Yeah, and we've invited and are always eager to connect with people who are working on these types of designs and concepts. So when we worked with a team in Colorado, we thought, well, let's move towards a more of a unified definition. What do we mean when we say trauma-informed design? So this working group that we've been connecting with defined it as a design process for the built environment, and is based on trauma-informed care principles. Now, these care principles, as Janet says, need to be adjusted and nuanced for the specific population in question. But the driving factor is that all the decisions about the physical environment needs to be filtered through the lenses of psychology, neuroscience, physiology, and cultural factors. So the aim, the intent of where we're moving is to create uniquely designed spaces where all the users will feel a sense of safety, both real safety and perceived. And those can be a little squirrely sometimes to figure out. Also feel respect, feel connection, social connection, community and cohesion is huge. a sense of control and dignity and joy. So each of these trauma-informed designed environments should aim to meet these unique needs of others. And they might look different for different populations.
And do you feel like it's more important to focus on trauma? I don't know how to pronounce trauma curated spaces. Let's say that are dealt with more sensitively. Let's say. Do you think it's more important to focus on residential projects or cultural and commercial projects, or are they equal, both equally the same? All right.
Absolutely. We're in agreement that there are clearly spaces that are designed and built for people who experience high traumas. For instance, I was the environmental designer for a child abuse intervention center. Their purpose is to intervene in suspected child abuse situations. So the reality is that all of the children and the youth, as well as the families coming, as well as the staff that work there, have some level of trauma. So the needs of that space it was a heightened awareness amongst the design team that all of the details would matter and how they interacted with each other, how the overall picture of the space felt and looked and operated would matter to everybody. But in now, even the last 100, I mean, we can't put a date on when trauma started to begin.
Yeah.
But of course, we're all very aware of what's happening the last year. So every space that anybody goes to will benefit from having trauma-informed design principles applied to it.
Right. There is a suggestion, and we've talked to Don Ruggles, who's an architect. He's also in Colorado, and he and Marielle, I'm gonna blank on her name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they just did a movie called Built Beautiful, and they argue that at some point right after World War I, that was such a traumatizing time for everyone. And then they came home to a pandemic, which was almost kind of forgotten because the war was so horrible. And then design started to really kind of manifest itself into some sort of non-thinking, non-beautiful function kind of way. And it really didn't help our senses. It just kind of pushed everything sort of away and didn't really explore what they were going through. That was sort of in a time when people did go and say, we're just going to forget about it. We're going to move on and go on from there. But it's kind of interesting to listen to their argument and see how that changed. And then, and then here came the Great Depression and then World War II, right? So there wasn't a lot of time to really kind of think about it. And then modernism kind of came into play. And again, there wasn't a lot of discussion or thought, a lot of taking in the built environment and dealing with people who have gone through trauma. I mean, obviously it wasn't even a thing then, but there wasn't even in consideration of the biology of the spaces in terms of like biophilia or any type of healing type of environments. They just kind of needed to push things out and get things out and get them going again, which we can all understand. But arguably it took a real toll on society and obviously the built environment and kind of sort of where we are today.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. Because of the work being done in other fields, we know so much more now about the brain, and this seminal study on the adverse childhood experiences really showed that trauma is a public health threat, and it's something that has lifelong consequences. It is demonstrated in study after study that their implications are phenomenal. I mean, it's Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, the California Surgeon General, who's declared this is something that needs to be addressed head on. It's not unique to a country. I don't think anybody is immune to the impacts of trauma and the traumatic, the toxic stress that can accompany that. But for me, it's important to always frame this knowledge with the idea that our brains have the ability to heal, and we can create our own neuroplasticity even as adults. Children do it without thinking about it. So knowing that there are options of hope that you can move to and take control of your life situation just little by little, and create yourself some healing, and then show others how that is done, is something that I'm a huge advocate for. And putting that into our built space is just, you end up being in spaces that just look beautiful, feel good to be in. And along those lines, it's this public good. Design used to be just for a select few that could have something well designed. Now there's a great tidal wave movement saying, no, everybody deserves good, beautiful design.
Bouncing off to that, like you guys were saying, trauma it's been existent for a long time, and at some point, no one has been immune to trauma. You can take the word lightly or not, but everyone experienced trauma at some point, and yet it's not a subject that's been taught in the design or architecture curriculum. Just as yourselves, you guys didn't learn about that in a design degree. It was a psychology, biology, or like human science. Yeah, exactly. And then you implemented this design aspect to it. So how do you feel like this should be integrated in the curriculum, or if you think it should be integrated?
We do.
That's
the short answer. Yes. So Davis could probably speak a little bit better to this than I can, but I think because it is so important, and it also, everything in our whole world has changed over the last literally like 365 days at this point. So it's it just magnifies how important this is. Davis and I were just talking the other day about how people are, as things are starting to loosen up a little bit, at least here in the United States, and people are getting ready to think about going back to work. What does that mean? Like, what's going to happen? How is that going to be? And I can feel anxiety ridden just going to the supermarket. Like, how am I supposed to be in an office now 8 to 10 hours a day with people who I don't think are washing their hands enough, or whatever that means? And I was actually on the IWBI COVID task force on getting people back to work. And if you can imagine, this was in June of last year, and it was very, we used the concept of talking about empathy and understanding, and getting, and really trying to understand your workers' trauma over this. I mean, we thought if we would go outside in the beginning, we could die. We didn't know what was going to happen. Now we're starting to understand a little bit more about what's happened, and some people I have a lot of friends that couldn't wait to be retired, and now they can't wait to go back to the office, and they miss that interaction, right? Because we're social beings. But how does that work? How do we make things safer for our employees? Again, just to make, again, whether real or perceived, how does that work? How do we get people, to feel safe in their built environment? And we think about our work environment as being the place that we pretty much spend most of our time. Now we've been in our little cocoons at home, and so how do we get out there? And so those things are really important to look at, and for us to examine. And I think for trauma-informed design, I think the next couple of years will be quite crucial, because at the end of the day, a year of your life that you're sitting inside and you're afraid of what's going on outside, or not, right? Because there's some of us who have not been so afraid of everything. What are the long-term effects of something like this? And it's global too. It wasn't just here in the United States or in Europe or whatever, in Asia. It was all around the world. How does that work? So, and how are we going to be resilient with it? Or are we not? Are we, is this going to fundamentally change everything? It's all the conversations we've been hearing for a very long time. But at the end of the day, and then how do we design for that? How do we design to help help people feel safe and within their environment, or how do we make people feel safer in their own home, right? And changing that up to make things, be more of a respite when you come home from being away for 10 hours a day, out in your office spaces or whatever. So it's going to be very interesting, I think. And there'll be more studies, I think, that will come out to help support a lot of what we're trying to do.
Yep.
I think that we're seeing, I'm involved at multiple different schools at the Boston Architectural College, and the students who are coming into the Design for Human Health program clearly are seeking this integration of design and human factors in human biology. But many, many other students in the architecture programs, in landscape architecture, interiors, everybody's has a heightened sensibility now to this. So they're requesting it in the curriculum. They're requesting it in their courses. They are eager to see, well, this is a cool looking design. I have the foundations of how to communicate my visual plan. I have visual thinking skills, but I need that insertion of how does that affect human behavior? And how do behaviors affect health? So the connection between our experiences, our health outcomes. What does that mean for you getting out of bed in the morning? I mean, everything comes back to an individual level. If we can encourage more development of curriculums like this in other schools, there are many other. I won't say many. There are others. There are definitely other programs that are working and understanding the human dimension and looking with an empathic eye how design affects folks, and learning how to bring evidence into the design process is a key component. Evidence-based design should be coupled with research-informed design practices, because this is research-informed is more specific. You can get into your population and not just put here's the evidence-based design, I'm going to layer it over the top of my plan and everything will be well with my guidelines intact, or let's just meet the minimum standards of the codes. Having some actual people just bring it back to that human-centered perspective again, really understanding the population at hand, I think is key.
Yeah. And I think, again, more and more people recognize not only this particular part as a concept, like Davis was saying, it's about this like human factor that has been missing in architecture and design for quite a while. Not to say that there weren't people out there doing that. Please don't send me your emails. But at the end of the day, it's so important, and we were already understanding the importance of it anyways. And to Davis's point, there's been a couple, mostly the BAC was one of the first leaders, at least in the United States, doing this. But at the end of the day, it's really quite important. I think new students coming in are more engaged with it. I teach biophilia at the Boston Architectural College, and I had the most students I've had out of the entire time the last few years that I've been teaching it, because they understand that the need for this restorative spaces and getting some sort of some sort of feeling of resilience and safety and I guess fullness. I don't know how else to kind of describe it, that it allows them to really kind of be a part of the built environment that I think has, again, been missing for quite a while.
Right, and I just have a comment about that topic. You guys are saying that students right now are requesting to learn more about this human factor in design. Do you think that this has to do with COVID or our generation? Like, does the generation play a factor on how much we're more invested in human factors or not?
I think it's both. I mean, Davis might have another opinion. She's shaking her head. Yes. I think it's definitely both. And I don't know how old you are, but
27.
Look, 27. So you grew up right after 9/11, right? And then there was the world economic collapse of 2008.
Yeah.
you know, we were in a 24-hour news cycle that provides us with all the gory news, and we'll even show you videos of it, whether you like it or not. And so you're a little bit older, but there's that group out there that basically grew up in some sort of anxiety-ridden world. And if they're understanding that if we can kind of create again a calmer, safer, at least built environment, that really helps. And also, I think because your generation is smart and understands more about the brain and understands that these things all work together, and you're all about health and taking care of yourselves, that other generations haven't. I can speak for myself. Grew up in the 80s, just going to leave it there. We did not exactly think about taking care of ourselves. And, you know, not that we didn't go to the gym or work out, but you guys have a better grasp on what that means and how everything affects each other.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's certainly this new movement has been growing and developing, and it's never possible to take one factor. Well, this is the reason why. The pandemic has heightened our awareness. It's given more reflective time to think through how things are going. We've slowed down, so we have a chance to entertain ideas and poke around on the internet and say, I wonder if anybody else is thinking along these lines. And it turns out that a lot of people are. We have plenty of students who are deciding, you know what, my career has been amazing and I'm ready for something new. And this bringing together their existing work in psychology or in occupational therapy or what have you, and putting that knowledge into a dovetail solution with intentional design, deliberate design that can be tailor-made. It's not always a new build either. Things can be modified in existing spaces that take on trauma-informed principles beautifully, and keep a sense of historic preservation comes into play. And how do we create spaces that have a cultural resonance and are culturally enriched? So it's a wonderful time in the design, trauma-informed design world. I mean, we're very busy with people thinking this is, how do we substantiate this, and how do we get it into the hands and the hearts of the people who are doing the drawings now, who are actively in the practice and aren't tapped into the latest research, or they luckily have to and say, well, what's happening, what are people thinking about? So this is, it's a big job. It's not up to just Anna and I. There's teams of people around the world doing very similar work, and it should benefit everybody, right?
Right. Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. We were so thrilled when you guys came through and you were asking about what we did, and it was really affirming to us to sit there and think to ourselves, oh, well, here is a great online magazine going, hey, like, what are you guys doing over here? And we knew it, but on the flip side was that it was a real confirmation to us that this is something that you guys see as just as important as we do, and moving that needle forward.
Oh no, for sure. The whole theme of March is going to be interior well-being, and we're really trying to find many ways that we can improve that and focus on that, especially after COVID and the anniversary of COVID, the miserable anniversary.
Yeah.
To dig deeper into trauma. Now, I know it's a teamwork, it's a huge process, and it involves many, many people. But for those who don't know, let's say in bullet points, how do you guys deal with different types of trauma? Because obviously there's many, many, many types of traumas, and some are either like verbal or a war, or we're going to dig deeper into that later on. But in general, how do you treat each one?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to understand trauma and to package it so it's comprehensible.
Yeah.
You can think of it at an individual level, relationship level, community level, and societal level. You can also think about when in the course of somebody's life the experience happens. I have my students really dig deep and understand what is the difference between a chronic stress, such as long-term pollution in a city, versus acute stress. Acute stress being something that happens in an emergency fashion that has a concrete ending and beginning.
Beginning and end, yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, the way I interpret it is more about back to the basics of the biological system and our nervous system. So what tends to happen is people will have an experience that will sort of get them stuck in this fight or flight mode. There's also a freeze mode and fawn mode. So it's a little bit bigger than just fight or flight. These four responses are what our nervous system is doing to try to protect us. And it was designed originally to protect us from acute danger or chronic danger of lack of food. Our ancestors would eat when they could and not eat when the food wasn't there. They didn't have a refrigeration system, etc. They had warring tribes, or they had predators. These experiences are no longer the case. The systems are still hardwired that way to respond as if those situations are still occurring. And so we end up creating noise and drama and lots of human social dynamics and entertainment, things that will bring about triggering experiences. So after, let's say there was some acute stress that happened in your town, and after the experience, 100% of the people are not going to be exhibiting a stuck mode. They're not going to stay stuck in a reactive mode. But those who do are going to have a heightened sense of responsiveness to potential threats. So as potential threats come to them, they will overreact unless they are recognizing and break that cycle and say, whoa, 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 this is just a hard conversation with my boss. This is not actually, something
threat,
that
right,
is going to impact my and get control of the nervous system reaction. I think is the way I frame and look at trauma. What do you think, Janet?
I was going to add to that. In just as like in the case that the domestic violence house that you did, that was a certain kind of set of traumas, and anything that we can kind of do to mitigate any kind of those senses that you are, it's the sympathetic system, right? It's that system that's going, I'm in fight or flight or fawn and what was the other one? Faint type of situation. So it's a very it's a little more nuanced for everybody. But if you can just kind of calm the sympathetic system a little bit, that's sort of the overarching rule for trauma-informed design, and then the rest of it sometimes kind of falls into some sort of place as a result.
Yeah, I can give a concrete example to help people get a little more understanding. Yes. And if you think about where people would sit, remember when we went to restaurants and you'd sit at the table and you'd sit down. Folks who had more of a traumatic experiences would not want their back to face the door. Right. Because their visual field would be behind. They would not feel a sense of control. And this arrangement of seating goes a long way in helping people gain a sense of mastery over their experience. It's just one small example.
It's a great example. I mean,
because thought of it that way.
Yeah, it is a great example. And, people with PTSD who say do come home from war, and they're sort of more of a classic example. They're going to need to be able to see where the doors are, who's coming and who's going, to protect themselves. And so stuff like that is, those, even things like that are great ways to kind of look at in terms of design, and how do we design to make sure that people have a nice field of vision in order to be able enough to see who's coming and who's going, in order for them to feel safe.
Can you share more about like what other design factors are? Like, for example, the door is something that I personally never thought, like it's very eye-opening. But what are some other design elements that can
Well,
be?
one way to think when you want to just kind of baby step into trauma-informed design is to consider that we have five senses. We also have two other senses that are proprioception, how our body fits into space, and vestibular system, which is sitting on a swing and getting some motion. So if you were to think about vision, which is majority of our brain power, it goes towards interpreting what we're seeing. Sight lines matter so much, and biophilia is such a popular principle because, in my understanding of it, and it's just my perspective, is that when we can gaze our eyes softly at things that are reassuring. I have a bird feeder outside of my window. I have something interesting to look at there. It's not threatening. It's something that I can move my eyes back and forth. When we sit and look at Zoom and our eyes are fixed in a forward motion, focal points, this corresponds to our brain that there must be some sort of threat. When you're looking, you're thinking of our ancestors looking, scanning their eyes, and they see a tiger, they're going to keep their eyes totally on that tiger. They're not going to be looking at the savannah around them because there is immediate threat. So we can train our brain and learn to do small practices such as just soften your eye gaze while you're sitting at work. So anywhere you're working today at your space, this is why we try to create something beautiful nearby to look at and not have, there's thresholds, sensory thresholds. People have different windows of, this is too visually pleasing for me, but it's understimulating to somebody else. So thinking through each of those sensory systems, just basics. Everybody can do it. I know, you're hearing vibrations are coming in your ears, you're hearing things, and you create a space that is not going to be overwhelming or underwhelming either.
Right. Yeah. You also actually need some sort of sense of mystery but places for refuge. It's part of the 14 patterns of biophilia, which is just, they have these, it's sort of, you think to yourself, well, should be just all restorative? Well, no, you need some almost like peril areas too, like in order to have like a full experience. And to Davis's point with, it goes back to that, how hardwired we are. And if you think about how hardwired we are, and we've only really been living in cities for the most part, most of us, for a few hundred years, right? So our brains have not kind of caught up to some of this, but that hardwired to look out into the horizon is such a key point. And I'm sure all your listeners probably, if they're here, they probably know about the study that was done about the hospital rooms, and one group was looking at the brick wall, right? It was such a turning point, and the other group was looking out at the gardens or the trees. They got better quicker. There was less use for drugs, and there was better health implications overall for that. So there's things like that too. So like implementing some sort of biophilia within the built environment or outside the built environment or outside, that can really help to bring that nervous system down to a level that is acceptable and healthy and calming and making you feel safe. So
the most essential part of that, I think, is that one can feel connection to somebody else. So the spaces are there to help facilitate our social interactions, or lack if we want to get away and not have social interactions. To help people feel a sense of agency over creating a sense of connection or alone time, as Janet was saying. So we know and we fully acknowledge that design, well, it's everything except for it's not, that we need the human, those connections. That's what's keeping us whole and safe.
It's so ironic that you guys mentioned the importance of biophilia and having this extended gaze, but at the same time, built environments, the purpose of having a built environment is this shelter, but it's kind of contradicting. So now this shelter is not safe enough for you. You have to look outside to get this sense of comfort. How important it, like, what is the reason why people right now are really craving this outside factor, like biophilia, and extending their vision instead of being satisfied with this shelter that they have?
I think you're absolutely right. It's just this tension between wanting to feel safe and secure. We're protected from the weather. This is incredible. Not getting sunburned, what have you, but needing to have some sense of what else is there. I want to know what's happening in the world. I want to connect and reach out and follow my curiosity. And so this is something when we look at our own individual experiences, we often don't want to go into a place of uncertainty. Dr. Huberman at the Stanford lab says our brain is a pattern-making machine. It's looking for path, duration, and outcome. We don't know the duration of COVID. We don't know how the outcome is, what it's going to look like. So this is why we're all in this heightened state of anxiety. And those of us who have been practicing for a while can keep our nervous system down-regulated slightly enough to keep working and writing chapters and what have you. But knowing that to really learn and to have this kick your neuroplasticity into action, you need to get into that uncomfortable space at the beginning, and then you get in the groove. I don't want to work on this writing project I have to do. It's uncomfortable. You go into it for a short while, and then you're in the flow of it, and it's okay. And then allowing yourself to have lots of deep rest so that the brain can do the work of putting this new knowledge into a longer term memory. And so when you think of all of that into the built environment, well, it's going to look different for everybody. What works for them and what's going to work for their people, their population that they're designing for. So it's a dynamic tension.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think it's an interesting question that you bring this up. Not everybody was able to achieve it during COVID, but going out to be in the woods, what better place to be away from the pandemic than being in the woods? I can attest to that. I've been living here in Vermont, of probably one of the most beautiful forest places in the world, to say the least. But it's it gave me a sense of I still had social connections here, and was able to be socially connected with people while being socially distant, and have a real sense of being socially distant. I would go on hikes with some friends, and we wouldn't see anybody. Try going and walking around your city and not try to run into at least 20 people who maybe wearing masks, not wearing masks, or whatever. So it gave you an opportunity to literally have some sort of respite of everything that was going on. Meanwhile, though, the whole feeling of biophilia with the surrounding parts of nature and the wonders that nature really affords us, and the awe that comes into being on some sort of hike, plus the fresh air, right? Because now we're in our masks and in our homes.
And Janet, it's also the core of all this is that human beings are meant to move.
Right.
So this is why that beckoning out the window is because our bodies just we're not designed to just be sitting. It's not right. The reason they're just calling it sitting is the new smoking. It's because our bodies are meant to move.
Right. And also now, it was already said that we spend 90% of our days and 90% of our days, or 90% of our time, indoors. So we took an opportunity to go out and explore and look and just take some time for ourselves. And I think it was an interesting question that you posed. I mean, because it was very
it's brought up another thought for me too, is that when we're feeling anxious, we have heightened nervous sense. What we can do for ourselves is to slow our breathing down. Breath work is becoming something that more and more people are exploring. This new book that's come out by James Nestor I'm reading, it's incredible because it's something we've been doing for centuries, but he's rewritten it in a way that's new and relevant and will remind us that, you know what, we actually do have control of the way we can exhale, if we're in fresh air, in nature, or walking around an interesting labyrinth in a nearby park, or taking a walk. We're not taking a walk to the coffee shop maybe, but there's some amount of, I can exhale, I can get a little more balance between my carbon dioxide level and my oxygen level. So the built space can foster our choices about all of this without us even needing to really work on it that hard. When a space is well designed, you just feel better because of components that come right back to the basics again.
What, in your experience, is the most difficult to design for, emotional or physical trauma?
That was an interesting question when you posed it. And, again, I don't think it fits into one box. The physical, again, kind of almost allows you to see it, so to speak, unless you've lost your eyesight. You've lost a limb, or there's some sort of cognitive, you've had some sort of traumatic brain injury or something. Like there's some sort of tangibility to that, right? As opposed to something that's more psychological. And I think it's also easier for, and Davis maybe can tell me if I'm wrong, but if you have something that's biological that's happened, I think people can understand it because, again, it's tangible, right? Whereas psychological, there might be more of a sense of, well, you just need to get over it. You need to be, I think especially here in the United States, we have a tendency to be like, that old adage, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Everywhere. That's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Like, get over it, right? And sometimes those are the hardest ones to kind of really work with, because they're so nuanced in that they manifest themselves in a lot of different ways. And I think, at least though, there seems to be more of a push nowadays to really kind of look at mental health as a real issue, and that it's okay to have mental health issues and diagnoses and cognitive disabilities and what have you. I think people are much more sensitive to it now, but still so much needs to be still examined and learned and listened to, and so we can get a better grasp on those particular factors when we're designing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just agree with Janet's ideas here. There's the invisible and there's the visible, and nothing like a airborne invisible virus to help us think about what we can't see is still impactful. Therefore, mental health is something that's coming up. It's not as stigmatized. It certainly is still stigmatized, but being able to trust that these symptoms, and the more people work with trauma-informed practices, and ACEs Connection is a huge resource that there's plenty of evidence of somebody is displaying a trauma-related symptom that isn't a limp with a hurt leg. It's some other behavioral patterning. So it is visible.
Right. And and it's been interesting to watch, to see. I have a few friends that have hidden physical or hidden health issues, right? They, for whatever reason, they're fine. They go about their daily lives, but now all of a sudden they have to explain to their boss why they can't go back to work because they have some sort of autoimmune issues, and they are at super high risk to be in these maybe closed environments where maybe the health of the air is not as good as it should be. And it's been kind of interesting to see how that's going to play itself out as well, and how we can kind of think about that as designers as well, and try to make sure that that's also push as part of the narrative. I mean, you don't have to go any further than to look at the wheelchair signia
True.
at the supermarket. I can't tell you how many people since I've started on my journey, how many people have said to me over the time, it's like, I got yelled at for using my placard. And one guy had just come through he had had some open heart surgery. So he had a temporary disability thing, but because he wasn't coming out in a wheelchair, that some woman yelled at him and said, you can't park here. That's not for you. And then he didn't want to tell her that he just had open heart surgery, and that's why he was there. And I said, well, the good news is that she's yelling at you because she wants to take care of the people whom she thinks are qualified for that particular parking spot. But the bad news is that, obviously there's a lot of undisclosed, unknown things that people have that need to be considered.
You dived right into my next question. In terms of like design speaking, from a design point of view, what are some of the common mistakes that are done in terms of trauma? Because I'm sure there are plenty that we are not aware of.
Sound. I don't know about David. Sound mitigation for me is like huge. Like I don't. That is like, because it goes back to your senses, right? And if you're in some sort of heightened level of some sort of fight or flight type of thing, or your sympathetic system is in overdrive, the sound can really just drive you one way or the other. I know that it was probably, if my parents lived in New York City during the World Trade Center 9/11, and it took them, I would say, probably about 3 or 4 years before they were able to walk down the street without hearing a siren and just jumping. And we were actually in Portland maybe about a year afterwards, and there was some fire engines that were going by. So we're even out of the city, right? We're even out of the city, and they're already
panicking.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, sirens could be jarring anyways. I don't care who you were, you've been through. I mean, they're loud. They're meant to alarm people. They're called alarms for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole reason for it. But holy smokes! I mean, I dare say they were ready to jump underneath the table. I mean, and they weren't even. They were in New York City. They weren't near where the buildings were. That constant sound of the alarms going off for weeks on end, and then it took them years to get over that.
Yeah, I'm grappling with, well, what is there one issue? I mean, it comes back, I think, to that tension of thinking about all the folks that have designed and done security, things that need to be high security settings, or have the controlling of people's behaviors in public. So you end up with this dynamic. You think of the park benches with impediments in them to prevent people from sleeping or skateboarding on them. So how does one navigate these challenges? These are not easy. Here's one guideline, do it, and everything will be fine. That's not the approach. It's more about, let's think creatively and do something that isn't yet in existence, so that people are safe. They're not necessarily creating opportunities for putting in bushes and landscaping that are beautiful, are also places where folks can hide and do attacks. So there's the designer and the architect needs to be able to think through multiple scenarios and play with the what ifs. How would their dear little niece feel in this space? How would their favorite grandfather, just using some more imagination and saying, let's really think about what it would be like if my sister broke her leg and had a temporary disability, and she also happened to be 7 months pregnant. How would she navigate the space she's coming into? Wayfinding is a huge tension for people when they don't see where they need to go. This creates this immediate, I'm not safe. This is, starts the ball rolling for more anxious symptoms. So it's a complicated question, Dina.
I'm sorry. All you need to do is go through the airport. You don't even one plane to the other, and like the signs don't make any sense, or they're in another language or whatever. I mean,
right.
But yeah, no. To your point, and then there was I can see if I can pull it up at some point, but I can't remember the designers. My apologies, but they did some work with Sandy Hook. They redesigned the school, and they took a lot of time to really almost try to come up with ways to give them an idea of how safe that they are, while also really keeping them safe, but without making them feel like they're in some sort of prison or, in some sort of fortress, and allowing them to have some sort of normal existence. And they did a lot of like hidden security concepts. And I think, to Davis's point, there was also some wayfinding that allows, again, with the open idea of concept of being able to see on the horizon and see your dangers coming, but also giving you places of some sort of refuge, and being, able to or give yourself some sort of idea that you could have some safe spaces as well, and not just the box, right? I mean, it's not box, it's not some sort of internal panic room or something like that. It was way more nuanced than that, and I thought that they did a pretty good job with that.
When you were talking about the 9/11, last summer, I'm from Beirut, Lebanon, and last summer, I don't know if you guys heard or saw, there was a massive explosion at the port. I was unfortunately there, and the damage was so enormous that almost half of the city was just butchered. Like there was nothing left.
Yeah.
And the trauma, like, just as we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, our generation is a lot more aware of trauma. We're a lot more vocal about it. We talk about it more, but the older generation does not, and they don't know how to cope with trauma. And the older generation was born into civil war. So it's like trauma over trauma over trauma. So the question is, and this is a debate that's been going on between architects, like, should we rebuild the city as it was before the explosion and kind of like trick our minds into thinking that nothing happens, just kind of like putting a band-aid over the wound? Or should we just take this as an opportunity to rebuild everything like in a different kind of aesthetic or a different design, to forget that it happened? What do you guys think about it?
Oh, such an important question, Dima, and my heart goes out to you and all your fellow citizens. We had a couple of people at the BAC who reported and wrote about the situation, and it's such an important question to be deliberate about and to think about, and not just assume, let's just plod forward. I mean, pain has a certain soft part in the very middle of it. This is the essence of humanity, and all of us have this. It's so covered and buried by so many that when we think about an entire city and how one should face dealing with it, it's going to have to reflect the citizens who live there. I think of the Reggio Emilia town in Italy that was flattened during World War II. And they made the intentional decision to rebuild better after. And they have the most notable school system called the Reggio Emilia. It's an entire approach that's the most beautiful, that educators around the world take trips to Reggio Emilia, Italy, to see how they've reconstructed it, in honoring the experience that they went through as a population, but also taking that pain and developing it into something new and beautiful.
Yeah, we did see that, and it made the news. It was horrifying to watch, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. I mean, it's just horrible. I think, yeah, Davis has it right. I think, right now the pain is still real, right? I mean, it's only been, what,
7 months. Yeah.
7 months, right? So I was gonna say, I am not good at math, but I I thought about that because we did a little bit of conversation, back and forth about questions, and I recognized that as something that it's a really important piece to think about. I don't think there's necessarily one right or wrong answer to that. I think everybody has a voice. I think maybe it comes somewhere in between, between, keeping things, you want things to be familiar, right? And yeah, you want things to go back to the way they were, but on the flip side, maybe there were things you needed to change, and it is an opportunity to give you something new. I think in terms of cultural, to dismiss it in its totality, you can't. I mean, look, again, back to 9/11, right? They have the reflecting pools, they have all sorts of different different types of areas where people can come and reflect and see what happened and remember what happened. I think that's such an important key to moving forward, but you're not. I don't think you're going to satisfy one particular. Somebody's going to be unhappy somewhere. But I think though that to you got to give yourselves a little bit of time. But I would maybe argue that there might be certain things that you might change and give yourself an opportunity to explore what that is. But of course, keeping your cultural heritage. I mean, you're not going to start putting like a whole bunch of like maybe skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Right. Like you want to keep something the way it was and have an opportunity for a better area. Maybe there's a way to also help people to make them feel a little more safe. So maybe there's different ways to approach that in terms of design as well, or even changing up some of the angles of the street to either allow, again, better sight lines or to be able to find their areas of refuge. Because that's going to, much like 9/11, much like the pandemic, it's going to take the citizens of Beirut to really, a generation to get over the trauma. I mean, that was incredible. And so you're going to, look at 9/11. I mean, they finished the building, a couple of years ago, right? I mean, they did all so it was almost like a 20-year, that's a generation, right? So it's going to take a little while, and to have people feel happy. And I think that New Yorkers at the end of the day are pretty happy with how everything turned out. We still have a big building to kind of show that, there's this, we're not going to come, we're not going to now just build a whole bunch of 50-story buildings, call it a day. But we also are mindful of not just replacing the two of them, right? So, and then again, all the memorials, the museum, right? To have people remember it in a thoughtful and a very kind of, I don't know, just sort of benign, respectful. Yeah, that's a better word for it.
All right. So in terms of, from what you've experienced, in terms of interior design, do you think when dealing with human emotions or human empathy or the way humans deal with space, do you think the design in terms of like color palette or material has more influence, or the interior architecture, so how the space is divided and where the openings are located? Which one has more influence?
I guess it depends on the time of day. It would depend on the person you were asking. It would depend on the purpose of why they were in that space. They need to work together. There's a principle that we teach that is called Gestalt, which is just the way our brain will fill in blanks and make sense of patterns as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So if you had a flow into a space that was disorienting, but you had the most beautiful finishes, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work right. And to that end, the finishes, the materials, if it's a commercial space, it needs to be commercial grade so it can stand wear and tear and cleanliness factors, etc., yet not look institutionalized as well. So we're fortunate that there are more and more amazing materials available that can be perceived as softer or more homey if that was what you were going for. But to think about that visual system again, for instance, Janet's thesis was on flooring and how disturbing flooring can be to one's perception. Navigating through a space, you're looking at the floor and if it's too highly reflective, for instance, that's going to cause problems. If there's a really bold graphic pattern, that can create a sense of wooziness. For instance, the flooring we chose for the Abuse Intervention Center that I worked on, we wanted it to tie into our theme of oceans and above ocean for optimism and diving deep below the surface. We had concentric circles, and we put it out and tested it and asked. And older staff members who might have different their eyes have become aged and they see things differently. Is this going to be disorienting? Is this, tell us what you really think about it. Try it out for a little while. Test the user, have that little user experience so that you can say, no, this is beautiful. This hits the mark. It's just right. So there's a lot of variables to consider. It's a super fun puzzle. You keep adding more puzzle pieces in and trying to make it all work together and on time and on budget, right?
It's always about the budget. Can you share some examples about some of the projects that you worked on, just to kind of paint the picture?
Oh, Jan, I think you should talk about the middle school in Boston that we worked on.
We specifically, how did we get involved with that?
It's a sort of the tipping point to get us started in trauma-informed design work. Yeah. You and one of the other students at the BSC met with, you went to some evening event, and there was an architect who said, I'm working on this really high needs, low resource middle school in Boston. And did you want to get involved? That's how it started, I think, wasn't it, Jen?
Yeah, no, you're right. I had completely forgotten. It seems like a lifetime ago, right? And they found out what we were doing in terms of designing for human health, and there was two architects that were involved with with Trinity Church in Boston, and Trinity Church runs programs outside of the McCormick Middle School in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And so when they heard about what we were doing, we came in for a couple of meetings, and we ended up helping them to look at some of their both their counseling offices. It started off with that, and then we ended up looking at both their hallways, their bathrooms, and their cafeteria, and designing. And how do you design for these kids who have had, and most of them have had sort of high ACE scores anyways. They are considered, horrible to say, this is like the last stop for them before they might either get institutionalized or basically kind of dropped out of the program or out of school. And so we had actually gone in and we looked at the spaces, and we tried to figure out how to create places again so that they would have areas to reduce aggression, and also give them some outlets that they don't have. And we also gave them some quiet areas to help re-regulate themselves. And so it was an interesting project. I would say it's still kind of ongoing. Right, Davis, to a certain degree, because we'd like to get in there to do more work with like the cafeteria, because the three areas of stress for kids in school is the hallway, cafeteria, and the bathrooms. There's no regulation in the bathrooms, right? It's a free for all, as is the hallways. The cafeteria has a little bit more of a regulation. There's usually some sort of adult supervision in there to a certain degree. When we went into study, it goes back to the sound. When we went to go study the spaces, the sound in the cafeteria at peaks was as high as what a train would be coming into the indoor train station. So you know what that sounds like. That's an incredible sound, right? It's high. It's, you know, the decibel level is incredible. And then so if you're dealing with fight or flight issues, and then now you are in the cafeteria and the decibel levels are at a certain height that would give anybody some sort of stress anyways, and get your nervous system on high alert. And now here you are with, as we saw, a lot of flying tomatoes being tossed back and forth in this space while they're dealing with their own trauma. But anyway, so it's been an interesting project to work on, and we're hoping to see a little bit more out of it. I think at the end of the day, they did not necessarily build out as much as we had kind of hoped to have them build out, but what they did do is that they started creating their own, what they called peace corners, so that would also be in the rooms, in the classrooms, so that the children wouldn't have to actually leave to go to the therapist office. They can stay there, but they would still be able to have these moments where they can help to soothe themselves and help to self-regulate themselves. And apparently it's been working so well that I think that they're trying to see about trying to really initiate this nationwide, to start these types of, they've done all the legwork and the studies and stuff like that, and they hope to sort of implement them again, I think nationwide as well. So it would be pretty cool. I mean, if we can try to help, these are the kind of kids that when they get something even little, I mean, something nice that you and I'd be like, what is this? And they're like, what did we do to deserve this? I just remember that. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where they shouldn't have to feel that way, and, you know, and feel safe within their environment. And it only helps them to learn, right? I mean, that's the other part.
Right. That's the one of the reasons we say that trauma is a public health crisis, is that it also interferes with a person's ability to function and to learn. There are changes to our prefrontal cortex and amygdala, hippocampus that are cause lasting changes unless something is done to interfere with it. So
Right.
that's certainly the premise that we worked with on the Abuse Intervention Center I designed with, is that we wanted to help the people arrive at the beginning and recognize these are professionals who are going to help me, but I'm not at the doctor's office. This is not a place that they would necessarily have positive experiences of in the past. So it's a new version of something that has whimsy in balance with that professionalism. And it had to be orchestrated in such a way that the person arriving and their family would have privacy from others who are coming. The reason the project happened was an expansion. They moved out of a smaller facility into this much larger one so they could serve more children. But yet they still needed to not be seen by anybody for privacy reasons. So it was complicated to organize that. And shows again how we need to make sure the design is tying into the culture of the workplace. For instance, the school in Boston, there was a cultural shift that was happening with teachers recognizing that if they have a peace corner devoted space in the classroom, that it is permissible, it is encouraged for a child having a stuck moment in their fight, flight, freeze response system to take themselves and learn to re-regulate and take agency over their own feelings so they can get back to the learning again, similar to the abuse intervention center, which we had so much fun with making it sensory for the kids. We wanted it to be tied into a theme that they could, it's real for them. They could touch the tiles on the walls. We had interspersed along with some industrial Velcro, custom made tiles that were something interesting to look at and something to think about and talk about, instead of the never ending hallways of blank walls that make people feel anxious and panicked. Yeah.
And do you think, I mentioned this question in the list, do you think it's about time that the WHO steps in, like kind of makes it mandatory or gives like some sort of accreditation for trauma-informed design spaces?
I'm personally of two minds about that. Absolutely, yes. But I'm also very cautious about guidelines and mandates. I want it to be so easy for the architects and designers to feel it and say, this is the obvious thing to do. This is what we want to do. It feels good to do. It has a much better return on investment. Everybody is more productive, happier, healthier, etc. And not have it come from above and told to them, do this, meet these minimum standards, because then the minimum is met. And the truth of what that building is about is too quantified. It's not, doesn't resonate through to the actual experience.
Yeah, it's funny. Davis and I we just had this conversation the other day. We were talking about the well exam, the well certification, and it's on a good path. It's on a right path. It feels good. However, things are more nuanced than that, and actually right now it's I mean, I know it's really set up for new and existing buildings, core and shell, and there's a whole system there, but these are for people who have a lot of money, right? I mean, this is not for everybody at the moment, and it's not even for small businesses. I mean, you could take the principles and apply them, but here's the other part, like the principles, they talk about culture a little bit, but it's like, put your culture in, there you go. Like, so what does that mean? And how do we design for that? And how like, again, it's this kind of metric system to a certain degree that I think, and I think what we end up doing is not one size fits all. Isn't that what we're trying to kind of get away from, like that? So we struggle with that one as well.
Yeah, maybe who could just put the spotlight on and generate funding to do more research and more advocacy and so forth.
We're available.
All right. Unfortunately, final question. What is the future for you guys? What are your future plans?
The world is our oyster.
Yes.
We have our seatbelt on and we're ready to keep working hard. I seem to be focusing most of my attention for the next few months on disseminating and writing a lot of these thoughts and concepts and putting them into chapters that I've been asked to co-author, different audiences. So I have a chapter in a book called Supporting and Educating Traumatized Students. And I promised the editor that I would write a shorter version and a different angle for him, and have yet to do that. So besides directing the Design for Human Health program, which has had an increase in interest and applicants, more are always welcome. I'm doing a lot of educating, writing, and I'd love to do more speaking. I have my shingle temporarily down to do applied design work because I am a mom and I have a menagerie as well. So, but I love to do applied design too. So That's my short answer.
Aren't we speaking at EDRA in May?
EDRA, I have two. Yes, there's two different talks on one is trauma-informed design, and I'm working with the Global Birth Environment Design Network as well, because we're building a living repository to better inform people about birth spaces. So EDRA is the Environmental Design Research Association. Mm-hmm. Their conference is in May, so that's coming up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm also I'm speaking at I think it's something called like Move On. It's a conference for programs for adaptive sports, and so I'll be talking with them. And obviously, I'm talking with a woman named Christine Cowart, who has been on a lot of my different podcasts, as well as Davis, talking about trauma-informed design. She talks more about trauma in itself, and she gives a nice overview of that. And we'll be talking about how to really incorporate trauma-informed design within these built environments. Davis and I think we're going to keep working on and defining what we're trying to do with this experience and with our organization, and how to spread the information out there and get more people involved and get a more robust conversation going. And then like I said, I've got my podcast, I run my company, and I might actually take a little bit of time off. I don't know. I'm not not too sure. We'll have to see.